Forget everything you know about snowmobiles. What if I told you that engineers once built a sled where you sit inside a cockpit like a fighter pilot, or a machine that is literally just a giant tank tread pulling you through the woods? Today we are shattering your reality. We are uncovering the 10 most insane, bizarre, and downright dangerous vintage snowmobiles that actually existed. These aren't sci-fi drawings, people actually bought these mechanical freaks. From the Iron Dog to the Snowhawk, you won't believe number 1 is real. Do not skip a second. Smash that subscribe button right now because we are about to take a ride on the weird side of winter. We are kicking off our list with a machine that looks less like a snowmobile and more like a lunar rover designed in a backyard garage. Hailing from Sudbury, Ontario, Canada, the Snowbug is instantly recognizable by its bizarre cab-over design. Unlike traditional sleds where the engine is tucked away under a hood in front of the driver, the Snowbug often featured an exposed engine mounted right behind the driver, or in some models, fully enclosed in a bulbous bug-like fiberglass shell. It wasn't built for speed, it was built to float over the deepest drifts without getting stuck. Mechanically, the Snowbug was a beast of utility designed for the harsh Canadian winters. It utilized a unique track design that was exceptionally wide, often exceeding typical dimensions, allowing it to crawl over fluffy powder where narrower, faster sleds would sink like a stone. The steering mechanism was equally strange. Instead of a complex suspension, the long handlebars connected directly to that giant single front ski. Powered by reliable industrial engines like Sachs or Kohler, usually ranging from 10 to 20 horsepower, these machines were not racers. They topped out at low speeds, typically around 15 to 20 miles per hour. So why does this weird machine have such a cult following today? Because it absolutely worked as intended. The Snowbug was the tractor of the North, capable of towing heavy loads of wood or supplies out of the bush. While it looked goofy with its bug-eyed headlights and squat stance, it earned respect for its durability. Today, seeing a Snowbug at a vintage show is a rare treat. It is a reminder of an era when getting there was more important than getting there fast, and when aerodynamics were completely ignored in favor of brute force flotation. Next up, we have arguably the coolest-looking failure in snowmobile history, the Raider. In the early 1970s, a company called Leisure Vehicles decided that riding on a snowmobile was too cold and dangerous. Their solution was that you should sit in it. The Raider featured a cockpit design inspired by race cars, complete with a bucket seat, a steering wheel, and your legs tucked safely inside the fiberglass bodywork. It looked like a spaceship skimming across the snow, and to this day it remains one of the most futuristic and aggressive designs ever mass-produced. The engineering behind the Raider was fascinating and ahead of its time. To accommodate the driver sitting low in a cockpit, the designers utilized a twin-track design with the engine mounted in the rear, behind the driver. This layout gave the Raider an incredibly low center of gravity. While other sleds were tipping over in corners, the Raider stayed planted flat. Weighing in around 400 pounds depending on the model and powered by engines up to 440 cc, it could reach speeds of over 50 miles per hour, offering a driving experience closer to a go-kart than a sled. However, the Raider had a fatal flaw that led to its extinction. While it was great on groomed trails, it was terrible in deep powder. The low-slung body acted like a snowplow, pushing snow rather than floating over it. Furthermore, riding in a cockpit meant you could not shift your body weight to help steer, which is a crucial technique in snowmobiling. Despite these issues, the Raider Twin Track remains a collector's dream. It represents a bold vision of the future that never quite caught on, a time when engineers thought the snowmobile should be a winter sports car. If the Raider was the family sedan of cockpit snowmobiles, the Manta was the high-performance Formula One car. Born from the ashes of the Raider concept and driven by the racing passion of Bob Bracey, the Manta Twin Track took the twin-track cockpit-style design to its absolute limit. While the Raider was marketed for comfort, the Manta was built for speed and handling. It kept the low profile and the steering wheel, but everything else was sharpened for performance, creating one of the most aggressive-looking machines to ever hit the snow. The Manta addressed many of the Raider's shortcomings with superior suspension geometry. It featured a more advanced, independent front suspension system that allowed the skis to articulate better over bumps, solving some of the handling rigidity of its predecessor. The twin tracks were optimized for grip, and the engines were high-performance liquid-cooled mills. Some race-ready Mantas were clocked at blistering speeds, exceeding 80 miles per hour on oval tracks. The machine was wider and more stable, designed to hug the inside lines of corners where conventional sleds would drift out wide. Despite its superior engineering, the Manta suffered from bad timing and high production costs. By the time the Manta reached its peak in the 1980s, the sit-on-top design of traditional snowmobiles had won the market war. Riders preferred the active riding style of leaning and standing over sitting strapped in a seat. The Manta became a niche product for a specific type of enthusiast who wanted something different. Today, finding a Manta, especially the later trail roamer models, is like finding a unicorn. They are mechanical marvels that prove the twin-track concept wasn't a bad idea, it was just a misunderstood one. Yes, you heard that right. Massey Ferguson, the company famous for building massive red tractors and combine harvesters, once decided to build snowmobiles. Enter the Ski Whiz. In the late 60s and early 70s, the snowmobile market was booming, and everyone wanted a piece of the pie. Massey Ferguson simply took their agricultural expertise and applied it to winter fun. The result was exactly what you'd expect: a snowmobile that was built like a tank, painted in iconic Massey red, and marketed to farmers who needed something to do in the winter. The design of the Ski Whiz was substantial and heavy, weighing in between 350 to over 400 pounds depending on the engine package. It wasn't sleek, it had a wide, flat hood and a very upright seating position. Under the hood, they used reliable JLO engines, which were common for the time but not particularly powerful. The real charm of the Ski Whiz was its marketing strategy. They were sold right alongside tractors at farm dealerships. You could buy a plow for your field and a Ski Whiz for your kids in the same transaction, emphasizing stability and safety over speed. Mechanically, the Ski Whiz was surprisingly decent, though undeniably heavy. It featured a bogey wheel suspension system that was durable but provided a ride quality that could be described as firm at best. It didn't handle bumps smoothly, it simply smashed through them with its weight. Ultimately, Massey Ferguson exited the snowmobile market when the industry crashed in the mid-70s, returning to what they did best: farming. But for a brief moment, the Ski Whiz proved that you didn't need to be a racing company to build a sled. You just needed a lot of steel and a good dealership network. The all-sport tracker is what happens when you cannot decide if you want a dune buggy or a snowmobile, so you try to build both in one machine. Produced by Allsport via the ProMark brand, the tracker was marketed as an all-season vehicle. The concept was ambitious. In the summer, it was a trike or a small buggy with wheels. In the winter, you would swap the front wheel for a ski and the rear wheels for a track system. It promised to be the only toy you would ever need, 365 days a year. The transformation process was the tracker's main selling point, but also its mechanical headache. The rear end usually involved a conversion kit where the track wrapped around the rear axle assembly. It featured a steering wheel and a bucket seat, similar to the Raider but with a more open buggy-like chassis. It used a torque converter system similar to modern snowmobiles, but the power-to-weight ratio was often an issue. Because it had to be sturdy enough for dirt and rocks in the summer, it was typically too heavy for deep snow in the winter, often getting stuck in powder. The Allsport tracker is a prime example of the phrase "jack of all trades, master of none." It wasn't a particularly great dune buggy because the track drive geometry was weird for wheels, and it wasn't a great snowmobile because it lacked the flotation and specialized suspension of dedicated sleds. However, the sheer ambition of the engineering is commendable. It captured the imagination of gadget lovers who dreamed of a modular garage. Today, finding a complete all-sport tracker with both the summer wheel kit and the winter track kit is incredibly rare and highly valued by collectors. Evinrude is a name legendary in the boating world for their outboard motors. But in the 1960s, they, along with their parent company OMC, jumped into the snowmobile game with the Skeeter. The Evinrude Skeeter and its cousin the Johnson ski horse is one of the most distinctive vintage sleds ever made. They were often referred to as flounders because of their incredibly wide, flat shape. The logic was simple: make it wide for stability. The result was a machine that was nearly impossible to tip over, but also nearly impossible to lean into a turn. The engine technology in the Skeeter was pure boat logic. They used opposed-firing twin-cylinder engines, which were very smooth but quite heavy. A fully loaded Skeeter could easily weigh over 450 to 500 pounds, making it a heavyweight contender. One of the most unique features was the reverse gear. At a time when most snowmobilers had to drag their sleds backward by hand, the heavyweight Skeeter offered a luxury reverse option, cementing its reputation as a luxury cruiser rather than a trail racer. They were marketed to ice fishermen who wanted a comfortable ride across the frozen lake. However, the Skeeter had a reputation for being a lead sled. They were incredibly heavy and sluggish. If you got a Skeeter stuck in deep powder, you were in serious trouble because lifting it was a two-person job. The wide tunnel also created drag in deep snow. Despite this, the Evinrude Skeeter is an icon of the 60s snowmobile boom. Its dashboard looked like it belonged on a boat, and the sound of that opposed engine is music to the ears of vintage collectors. It represents a time when marine engineers tried to conquer the frozen water just as they had the liquid kind. Now we are going way back in time to the very infancy of motorized snow travel. Before the snowmobile as we know it existed, there was the Eskimotor. Produced in the late 1930s, this machine essentially looked like a sewing machine mounted on a ski. The concept was derived from the motorized sled idea, where the engine unit was out in front, pulling the rider who stood on a separate sled or skis behind it, holding onto long handlebars. It was manufactured by the Teeny Trailer Company, which later became famous for boat trailers. The mechanics of the Eskimotor are terrifyingly simple. It featured a small air-cooled engine mounted directly on top of a single steerable front track and ski unit. The traction came from a steel-cleated track that churned the snow directly beneath the engine. The rider had very little control compared to modern standards. You were essentially being dragged across the ice by a mechanical dog. The balance was precarious and the exposure to the moving parts was dangerous. With a top speed of barely 10 to 15 miles per hour, it wasn't fast, but it beat walking in the snow. The Eskimotor is significant because it represents the prehistoric era of snowmobiling. It shows the desperate need people had for winter mobility. It wasn't about recreation, it was about utility. Postmen, doctors, and utility workers needed a way to travel when roads were closed. The Eskimotor was an ingenious, if crude, solution. Seeing one today is shocking because of how small and fragile it looks compared to modern machines, yet it paved the way for every single snowmobile that followed. It is a rare piece of history that shows the humble beginnings of the sport. Jumping forward to a much more modern era, we have the Snowhawk, manufactured by A.D. Boyven in the 2000s. While not vintage in the same sense as the 1960s sleds, it is already a classic oddity that has vanished from production. The Snowhawk asked a radical question: why do snowmobiles need two skis? Motorcycles only have one front wheel, so A.D. Boyven built a snowmobile that was effectively a dirt bike for the snow. It featured a single ski up front, a monoski, and a long, narrow track in the back, all wrapped in a motocross-style chassis. The riding experience of a Snowhawk was entirely different from a standard sled. On a normal snowmobile, you steer by turning the handlebars. On a Snowhawk, you steer by leaning, exactly like a motorcycle. If you stopped moving and didn't put a foot down, you would fall over. Powered by punchy 600cc or 800cc engines, these machines were fast, capable of hitting speeds over 80 miles per hour. This design made it incredibly agile in deep powder and tight forests. It could carve lines that a wide two-ski sled could only dream of, offering huge suspension travel for jumps. So why isn't everyone riding one? The learning curve was simply too steep. For a seasoned snowmobiler, getting on a Snowhawk felt unstable and frightening at first. For a motocross rider, it felt natural, but the market for winter dirt bikers was too small to sustain mass production. The Snowhawk remains a cult legend. Owners swear by them, claiming it's the most fun you can have on snow. It stands as a testament to thinking outside the box, or in this case, outside the stable three-point stance of traditional sleds. The MTT-136, or My Track technology, is another entry that blurs the line between vehicle and tool. Imagine a tank tread. Now imagine putting an engine inside that tread. Now imagine holding onto a handlebar attached to that tread and letting it drag you through the woods. That is the MTT-136. It is a personal traction device where the entire machine is the track. The rider doesn't sit on it, the rider is towed by it, or can attach a sled to it to sit down. It looks more like a robot than a vehicle. The genius of the MTT-136 lies in its portability and torque. Because it is essentially just one long track with a drive unit, it is incredibly light compared to a sled, weighing usually between 130 to 150 pounds, depending on the battery or engine configuration. It has an immense contact patch with the ground relative to its size. It can climb incredibly steep grades and pull heavy loads because it doesn't have the dead weight of a chassis or skis dragging it down. The slim profile allows it to weave through dense forests where a full-size snowmobile would get wedged between trees. While it looks bizarre, like you are walking a robotic dog, the MTT-136 solved a specific problem: getting into tight, inaccessible areas. It wasn't designed for trail riding at 60 mph. It was designed for exploring the unexplored at a steady pace. The visual of a person holding onto a long, churning belt of rubber driving through the snow is undeniably strange, making the MTT-136 a worthy addition to our list of weird engineering. It proves that sometimes less vehicle is actually more capability. We end our list with a giant, the Polaris Sno-Traveler. Before Polaris became the sleek performance brand we know today, they were building the Sno-Traveler in the early 60s. Specifically, the rear engine models were massive. The engine was mounted behind the driver to aid traction, but the defining feature was the front end. It looked like a lawn tractor on skis. The hood was a giant bulbous metal nose painted in bright colors, earning it nicknames like the Iron Dog or simply the Tank. The Sno-Traveler was built for a time when trails didn't exist. It had to make its own trail. It used heavy-duty cleated tracks and low gearing to churn through the deep snow of Minnesota. These machines were incredibly heavy, often tipping the scales at over 500 pounds. They were slow, usually maxing out at 10 to 15 miles per hour, and they vibrated so much that riders often felt numb after a ride. But they were unstoppable towing machines, capable of hauling sleds full of wood or supplies through conditions that would stop a modern sled. Comparing a vintage Sno-Traveler to a modern Polaris Indy or RMK is shocking. It shows how far the technology has come, from heavy industrial steel tractors to lightweight carbon fiber rockets. The Sno-Traveler is the grandfather of the modern snowmobile industry. It wasn't pretty, and it certainly wasn't fast, but it laid the foundation for the sport we love today. It is a glorious, heavy, metallic reminder of humble beginnings and the sheer determination required to conquer the winter landscape. From the tank-like tracks of the MTT-136 to the race car cockpit of the Raider and the single-ski agility of the Snowhawk, these machines prove that the road to perfection is paved with strange experiments. They might be obsolete now, but they are beautiful examples of human ingenuity. Which one of these weird machines would you actually want to take for a spin? I think I'd take the Raider just to feel like a sci-fi pilot. Let me know your pick in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into mechanical history, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Thanks for watching and stay warm out there.